I think it's no exaggeration to say that we're living in an age where there is absolutely no shortage of accessible entertainment to the masses. The countless amount of movies and TV shows you can watch at the simple click of a button and a $50 subscription you'll most certainly forget you ever signed up for. The nostalgic Saturday morning cartoons you would purposefully wake up for super early in the morning so that you could sit down and gawk at it as you unloaded your baby bowels into your already full diapers from the night before. The infinite plethora of music blasting out of your crappy $25 Skull Candy earbuds that you know is going to be destroyed by the end of the week, but it doesn't matter, mum, they did a Fortnite collab and they don't accept V-Bucks. The countless number of days and nights you spent playing Mario Kart Double Dash with your friends, where the only core memory that's somehow burned into the back of your brain is someone in the room saying, "Damn it, Steve, I want it to be Yoshi." But among that vast sea of choice, there is one group of individuals who have dedicated their entire lives to this unique entertainment format coming from this really obscure and strange and insignificant country called Nippon. An art form that has no sound, no movement, no color, and yet is somehow still able to enthrall and capture the lives of millions of people all over the world for decades and decades. A little art form called manga. Look, if you've been on my channel before, then it should be no surprise to you, but I freaking love manga. Some of the earliest memories that I have of my life is little old me sitting down on my pea-stained playmat car rug while opening up volume 2 of the Doraemon manga that my mum gave to me from somewhere and reading that crap over and over and over again and just being absolutely enthralled into whatever the pages were showing me, because little did I know that normally the number 1 comes before the number 2. And if you've never been on my channel before, then first of all, hey, how's it going? It might be a surprise to you that I'm talking about this kind of stuff, considering that my username here has a different type of Japanese art form that hasn't really picked up in relevancy all that much over the past 10 years or something. But trust me, if it wasn't for me reading manga in the first place, I would never have gotten into whatever this other thing is. Because throughout history, the art form of manga has touched the hearts of people in so many different ways. But I doubt a lot of you watching this video or know anything about manga know exactly how all of this came to be in the first place. How did all of this come together? These crazy colorless lines on paper that somehow form characters and stories that people have fallen in love with over decades come to be how it is today. My name is Joey the Anime Man, and this is the entire history of manga explained.
Oh man, this video is an hour long? Well, I better find some snacks or something to eat while I watch this video. Oh, what's this? Sakurako. Isn't this that monthly artisan Japanese snack box that supports local snack makers? But that's not all, Joey! Each box comes with 20 traditional snacks, including Japanese teas and a special Japanese tableware. Wait, isn't this a pre-recorded video I'm watching? How are you talking to me right now? Don't worry about that. Just open the box there. What's this month's theme? Tell me. Well, it says, Traditions of Tokyo. Well, since this video is going back into a type of history, I think this is the perfect time to go through the history of Japanese snacks as well, don't you think? Oh, this must be this month's tableware. That's pretty cute. Go ahead, man, pick some snacks. What are you gonna eat? Well, since I like sweet things, I'm probably gonna try this ningyo-yaki because I do like some sweet things. Good choice. Well, I'm a little bit more of a savory head, so I'm gonna try these hineri arare, these twisted little chips. This kurumame tea is also fine as well. It perfectly matches with all the snacks I've had so far. And if you want to know more, then you can check out that little booklet that it comes with. It tells you all the information about the snacks as well as allergen information. Damn, this is a pretty great box. How do I get more of these? I'm glad you asked, Joey. If you click the link in the description below and use my coupon code on screen right now, then you can get yourself a little bit of a discount at checkout. Wait, am I inside the advertisement right now? How did this happen? A big thank you to Sakurako for today's sponsor. Now, let's get back to the video. Wait, I thought I was watching the video. How did I get inside of it? Oh god, help! Help!
Alright, let's start at the very beginning. An era that I'm sure many of your grandparents will have really fond memories of. The year is 1100 AD. The samurai have just been upgraded in Japanese society to a much higher form of power than before, and who knows, they might get so up their own asses that they'll start taking over the government or something, but I'm not going to tell you that. What am I, the History Channel? In the midst of all of these culture-defining tussles and wars, as Japan was trying to figure out who exactly they were, a bunch of artists that were laying low from all of that war stuff were busy creating these things called emakimono, or illustrated scrolls, which were these beautiful horizontally laid out art pieces that use pictures to tell a story, and sometimes little bits of very, very difficult to read text, like so difficult it makes a doctor's note look like Times New Roman. And these stories were really varied in genre. I'm talking things like war and romance, folklore, religion, and even sometimes a little bit of the supernatural. The general idea was that you would take these scrolls, you would unravel them, spread them out horizontally, and you would follow the pictures from right to left as it tried to tell you some kind of a coherent story. Sounds familiar, right? Well, from this obscure art movement birthed what is commonly referred to as the first example of a manga in history. This little thing right here called Choju Jinbutsu Giga. Try and say that 3 times fast. Choju Jinbutsu Giga, Choju Jinbutsu Giga, Choju Jinbutsu. Or if you're not as Japanese as I clearly am, then you can try its English title, which is Scrolls of Frolicking Animals and Humans. Man, they had these long-ass light novel titles down before the light bulb was invented, apparently. Written sometime between the 12th and 13th century, the scroll and the author of the scroll itself is hidden under a veil of a little bit of a historical mystery, as only one author is seemingly credited in the creation of this scroll, more namely this priest artist here called Toba Sojo. But a lot of people believe that it wasn't just one artist that was responsible for this, but rather a whole collective of artists, as when you go through each of the different scrolls, you start to see very differing artistic styles that would have been kind of difficult for just one author to do. I don't know, maybe they were kind of treated as like manga assistants along the way, who knows? Now, to my knowledge, this has never been done on YouTube before. This is a YouTube first that you are about to watch right now. But considering the fact that I am probably the only person on YouTube who has ever talked about this particular scroll right here, allow me to give you, for the next couple of minutes, a succinct review of what is considered the first manga ever created. God damn, get on my level, booktubers. I'm out here reviewing historical scrolls, dog. The first scroll here shows a bunch of anthropomorphized animals doing all sorts of frolicking and jovial activities that animals in the forest normally do. You know, we're talking things like tag and sumo wrestling, and a good old sesh of Hikaru no Go. The second scroll, however, goes in a bit of a different direction and shows off some really normal looking animals like roosters and even the mythical creature Kirin, you know, like the same Kirin that you see on those beer cans in Japan, who are just kind of standing around and looking very majestic and mysterious. It's a bit jarring compared to the first scroll you just saw, considering just how much more simplistic this second scroll seemingly is. Like, this is the kind of picture you would see on your bootleg copy of the Genki textbook. The third scroll, however, switches up things drastically and this time shows people frolicking around and doing jovial things. I couldn't tell you exactly what they're doing in this particular scroll, but hey, this is war-torn Japan. You gotta make up your own fun somehow. The fourth and final scroll here shows a little bit more of a cruder style painting of, this time, a bunch of people doing certain activities like riding around on horseback or pulling a man who is surfing on a giant wooden log like he's goddamn Tao Pai Pai or something. Girls be like, I bet he's cheating on me. Meanwhile, the boys here are just coming together and trying to recreate Dragon Ball scenes in their underwear. You love to see it. Now, if you've been listening to my crappy synopsis thus far, you might be kind of scratching your head and saying to yourselves, so Joey, what exactly is the story of this? Oh, you stupid little weeb, how I pity you. There is no story. In fact, that's actually the biggest mystery that even historians of today are trying to get around to, is the fact that these 4 scrolls that seemingly are trying to tell some kind of a story don't really have any such coherent story, let alone historians have no clue what exactly the original intentions of the creation of these scrolls even were. I mean, you have to really understand and let this sink in for a second, because you're really only just looking at a bunch of pictures right now. But the real thing is not just some like random size scroll that you'd see being sold at a local anime convention for $15 a pop. Some of these scrolls go up to 10 meters long when unraveled and weigh an absolute buttload of weight. I just have a really difficult time believing that a bunch of monk priests during a very politically fragile and war-torn time of Japan just kind of sat down together and smoked a joint and just went, hey, Jimmy over here just wants to start writing a bunch of animals and people just mucking around and put it in a scroll and just not elaborate any further and just... Look, I'm not going to go too deep into this particular work because there's still so much to talk about in this video, but if you are somewhat interested or I somehow convince you to become interested in this, then I highly recommend you go down this rabbit hole in your own time because it is fascinating. Either way, the bottom line of all of this is that Choujou Jinbutsugiga here was responsible for firing off the catalyst for what would become manga, but just looking at this is still very, very far away from how we today, 21st century people, conceive as the idea of manga. So to see something a little closer to home, we have to jump into this time portal right here. Come with me, guys. Whee! The year is 1785. A tobacco shop owner by the name of Santo Kyoden starts messing around one day drawing a bunch of illustrations inspired by works like Choujou Jinbutsugiga and creates a work called Sharebon, or Book of Manners, that focuses more on modern day relationships during the Edo period as opposed to the more Chinese philosopher themes of the previous works. The decent amount of 5-star reviews he got from that results in him creating Shiji no Yukikai, originally created as a promotion for his tobacco shop but was purchased more for the quality of the contents, and as far as we know is actually the first common usage of the word manga in Japanese history. Before we move on, quick Japanese lesson. The word manga is written like this in kanji, with the first symbol meaning whimsical and the second symbol meaning illustrations. Whimsical illustrations. Manga, you get it. And although looking at these images from the Edo period may not necessarily fire off any whimsical synapses in your brain today, but back in the Edo period, people lost their shit to this stuff. Bro, you think the reveal of Gear 5 was hype to be a part of? Imagine being there during the Edo period when manga was literally invented. I would have crapped inside of my hakamas. But enough of that, let's fast forward the tape right here and head on to 1862. New Zealand just discovered what trains are. Some dude in France decides to write a small play called Les Miserables or something, and America is trying to figure out if racism bad. They might need a little more time to think about that one. Meanwhile, over in the UK, some dude named Charles Wergman visits Yokohama for the first time and thinks the current state of Japan is a bit shit in it, and publishes this, The Japan Punch, a monthly magazine that satirically tears apart the inequalities and frustrations that he noticed about Japanese media and politics, and overall disparities between the Japanese and the foreigners who were trying to live in Japan during the Meiji Restoration. The magazine used more Western-style comic strips and cartoons to criticize and poke fun of what was happening in Japanese society at the time, and the Japanese government hated this, like they wanted this motherfucker dead. Despite the backlash, however, the magazine gained a surprising amount of support from both foreigners and the Japanese, and would actually later go on to influence the monthly magazine format that you see in a lot of manga today. That's right, Japanophiles, all your favorite manga magazines like Jump and Sunday and Magazine were all started by some facetious British dude talking shit about Japan. Put Shonen Jump magazine in the British Museum. Look, that might be a bit of a stretch, but what's important here is that Workman's unique mixture of Western influenced newspaper comic art and the traditional ukiyo-e styled Japanese art that he was studying at the time would later go on to inspire a bunch of early manga series just 100 years later. Let's time skip again to the 1930s. Amelia Earhart is about to make aviation history. Disney just dropped their first banger, and Japan is about to commit a horrible war crime which I'm sure they'll never forget to admit to their citizens. In the streets of Osaka, there are these men walking around with cardboard plaques with pictures on them and telling stories to children on the streets by narrating each panel and flipping over to the next to create some kind of coherent story, I wonder if that will lead to anything. This is the art of kamishibai, and it reached its peak of popularity during the Great Sage of the 30s, until the invention of television not long after. Television, always ruining the fun. But this now relatively dead art form here went on to inspire arguably one of the most influential, important manga series ever created, and what I would like to think is the true beginnings of what manga would be known today. Sazae-san. Oh, you were expecting me to say Astro Boy, weren't you? Well, hold on to your butts, all you 7 Astro Boy fans. I will get to you in a second. Just sit your ass down for a second there, buddy, because too many people overlook this series when talking about the actual history of manga. But not me, baby! I'm a goddamn elitist! Created by Hasegawa Machiko in 1949, it originally started as a 4-panel or yonkoma manga in the Asahi newspaper, and later went on to garner a whopping 68 volumes until Hasegawa's retirement in 1974. So you might be asking, the hell is Sazae-san about? Well, I will tell you, audience. Well, the story follows Isono Sazae, a Japanese wife and mother who isn't like your average 1940s Japanese girl, dog. Not me. She's not interested in putting on makeup or wearing a kimono to attract her future husband like every other lame Japanese woman was. No, instead, she's interested in channeling her inner Keenan McWilliam and decides to join the Saddle Club.
Only Australians are gonna get that joke.
In a form of society where the common belief was that women belonged in the kitchen to serve their working husbands and basically be diligent slaves to their bread makers, Sazae-san says, screw all that misogyny, I'm a strong, independent woman, bitch, and goes around bossing her husband around in very progressive and pro-feminist ways for the time. To say that the story themes of Sazae-san was ahead of its time is a severe understatement, and although the deeper themes can be perceived as somewhat libertarian, the manga itself presents Sazae's life in light-hearted, quirky, low-impact slice of life ways, with the main focus being on the importance of family and enjoying the simpler things in life, like being a horse girl. And this family dynamic would later go on to be the embodiment of the standard Japanese family post-World War II, so yay, progression! Also, quick tangent, Sazae-san actually got an anime adaptation back in 1969, nice. And believe it or not, it's still airing to this very day. Like, if you thought One Piece was long with its pitiful 1,000 episodes, get on Sazae-san's level, dog. This monster has over 7,000 episodes. I mean, this series is so old that my own mother grew up watching this series, as did I, and my mother is old as shit. Sorry, Mom. Now, what makes Sazae-san here so important in this conversation is what it actually ended up doing for the early days of the modern conception of manga. This is post-World War II, which was a real explosive moment in Japan, artistically speaking. Hasegawa's work on Sazae-san would later be adopted into what we now know as the shoujo genre, that focused more on daily life and simple themes that could be explored in depth at a slow yet richer pace. And while we are here in the hospital during this birthing of the manga world, it is time to introduce the key figure of this video, nay, the most important figure of this entire video. Ladies and gentlemen, please bring to the stage the father of manga himself, Tezuka Osamu. This man was a genius, to say the least. Born in Osaka in 1928, he grew up watching Walt Disney films that eventually inspired him to start drawing. Notably, apparently having watched the film Bambi over 80 times in a row, which I don't know how any human could stomach that amount of sadness at once. Like, not even MySpace era emos out there would be able to do that. At the ripe young age of 17, he draws and publishes his first manga, Maa-chan no Nikicho, or the Diary of Maa-chan, a 4-panel manga following the daily life of this preschool kid named Maa-chan, which I don't know why you needed me to explain that to you, it's literally in the title. Although there was only 1 volume ever published, and looking at it now, the art style is not up to par with Tezuka's later works, the series ended up being a relative success for Tezuka, and there even being physical Maa-chan dolls being made and sold to the public, technically making these the first ever piece of manga merchandise ever created. How did we go from something like cool and interesting like this to pin badges and clear files, otaku merch has really fallen off. A year after the success of Maa-chan, one of Tezuka's mates, who happened to be a big fan of the classic book Treasure Island, approached and convinced Tezuka to make a manga adaptation of it, which turned into 1947's Shin Takarajima, which was an absolute massive success in the manga world and really put Tezuka's name on the map and kick off what is referred to by many as the golden age of manga. Now, Shin Takarajima here was quite a landmark for manga, not necessarily for its art style, but rather for the way that it was constructed. Today, we all know that manga consists of frames, or koma as it's called in Japanese. Usually there are multiple windows on a single page that cut off and independently contextualize a scene so that readers can focus on them one at a time while reading manga. Typically, up until this point in the world of manga, there would only really be one frame per page, but Shin Takarajima here was one of the earliest adopters of using multiple smaller frames in a single page, using not just simple squares, but other geometric shapes like circles and even manuscript tearings. This obviously took a lot of inspiration from American newspaper comics at the time, but was implemented in longer singular stories that spanned across multiple pages and multiple volumes, which, as you all know now, became the basis of manga storytelling today. It's interesting to think that something as simple as using multiple panels and multiple pages to show a character maybe traveling from one place to another was absolutely mind-boggling and revolutionary for its time, and really sunk the readers into the world of the story they were reading. And the pacing of which Tezuka constructed these panels was very calculated as well. Remember how Tezuka grew up watching a lot of Disney films, you know, like Bambi 80 times, like the absolute psychopath he was? Well, Tezuka understood the pace at which readers would be looking at these panels and spaced out the movements so that it would replicate something close to animation frames, to make movements and action sequences more fluid and easier to follow, which is shocking that a manga from almost 80 years ago was able to do that, but you still get manga in the modern days that aren't able to do that for whatever reason. After the success of Shin Takarajima and while in medical school, Tezuka steps into the kitchen and chefs up his sci-fi trilogy masterpiece, Lost World, Metropolis, and Next World, which featured early adoptions of the steampunk genre that at the time was kind of unheard of in Japan. This series would be the direct catalyst of some of the most well-known sci-fi manga ever created, like Matsumoto Deiji's epic masterpiece, Space Battleship Yamato, and Hayao Miyazaki's Mirai Shonen Conan, just to name a few. And if you've never heard of those series before, then I think you need to revoke your manga anime fan card, because they are genuinely some of the most important sci-fi series ever created in the world of manga and anime. Give me a license right now. Come on, fork it up. Soon after the success of this trilogy, and while riding the wave of popularity, Tezuka crafts his first true commercial success with Kimba the White Lion, an often underrated and underappreciated manga that Disney just went ahead and definitely did not rip off every single portion of, but everyone seems to be cool with it because Hakuna Matata, it means no copyright infringement. This is around the point where you really start to see the heavy adoption of the quote-unquote manga style that was a lot different in flavor to earlier works of Western comic strips around the time. Not just in the physical art with its big eyes, expressive faces, and physically written in onomatopoeias like wind gusting through the plains or someone getting bonked in the noggin, but also in its deeper themes and narrative structures that were previously somewhat unexplored. If you've never read Kimba the White Lion and you are interested in the history of manga, then I highly implore you to go out there and do so, because this series has aged tremendously well, like that great whiskey on grandma's top shelf. And despite its cute aesthetic on the surface, below the surface, it is an incredibly dark story. The story follows Kimba, a white lion, ain't no way, who lives in a relatively free and safe African safari with his parents. But after Kimba's dad approaches a nearby village to feed his starving lion children, he is ultimately killed and skinned completely of his hide, while his mother is shipped off to some zoo, which kicks off DreamWorks' masterpiece animation, Madagascar. After learning about this absolutely horrible fate, Kimba sets off on a quest to learn about the human world and swears to protect his homeland while pursuing the idea of peace and understanding with the human race, this, just like his late father would have wanted. Now, although Tezuka was not the first manga artist to do these kinds of coming-of-age philosophical stories about death and destruction and mutual understanding of the enemy, I'd say he was one of the first to perfect all three at the same time with Kimba. Mind you, these fairly dark and brooding and deep themes that I just talked about were presented and shipped and sold to children. Kimba the White Lion is a children's manga. While the West was reading Clifford the Big Red Dog over here, Tezuka was like, don't mind me boys, just planting the seeds of generational trauma. Japanese kids in the 50s must have just been built diff because of manga like this, and Tezuka knew exactly what he was doing, as he would go on just a year later to publish arguably one of the most famous manga series ever created, Astro Boy. Thank you so much for waiting, Astro Boy fans. Here we are. This was the beginning of what I like to call the anime eye aesthetic. You know how every person who has no idea about anime and doesn't care to know anything about anime know the sole fact that these characters have these massive bug-like opticals that are way too anatomically big for their tiny faces? Well, Astro Boy here was basically the first popular example of this style and would later influence every shonen, shoujo, and pretty much every other manga from here on out with this very distinctive aesthetic. Look, I'm not going to dive too deeply into the story or the themes of Astro Boy because there has already been millions of liters of ink spilt about what makes Astro Boy so influential, but all you need to understand is that this little boy right here and the series that he is a part of is, without a doubt, the most influential and successful manga series ever created. If you don't believe me and you just think that I'm some old, jaded, biased dude towards the oldies but goldies, consider this. To this day, the Astro Boy manga has sold 100 million copies worldwide. To put that into perspective, that has sold more than Death Note, SpyxFamily, and One Punch Man combined. And yet still, to this very day, for some reason, Astro Boy is constantly thrown out of the GOAT conversation when it comes to manga or the greatest manga of all time because it's old and no one reads it anymore and it was just the first manga ever created, so it's not it's like, just shut up. Just shut up. Shut up and go read Astro Boy, for sake. You call yourself a manga fan? Or if you're just like so allergic to vintage manga, then at least do me a favor and go and read PLUTO, the spiritual successor to Astro Boy, because the story is absolutely amazing. Can we just stop disrespecting my boy Astro Boy for just a quick second? Please, I beg of you. Rant over, let's get back on topic. Tezuka would go on to write over 200 individual manga series in his lifetime, some of which becoming absolute Goliaths of the 60s and 70s, like Blackjack, Dororo, and Buddha. But there's one series in particular that I want to highlight, not necessarily because it is the most important in his catalog, but more so because it is a series that I find to be one of his best works, one of his most influential works, and what I think is maybe one of the best manga series ever made to this day, Phoenix. It's kind of difficult to convey exactly what makes this series special, but one thing I can say is that Phoenix is Tezuka's equivalent to Frank Herbert's Dune series. Like Dune, Phoenix was Tezuka's life work. In fact, he actually died before he could finish the entire series off, with the latest arc, Sun, being published just a year before his death. The story is about reincarnation and the effects that this ideology has on humanity as a whole, but the manga is interesting in the way that it is constructed, as it follows multiple main characters across multiple moments of space and time. For example, the first book, Dawn, is set around 200 AD, where humanity is still in its roots and this idea of gods and spirituality is at its most esoteric. The legend of the Phoenix is murmured amongst the people who believe that you will be able to gain immortality by drinking its blood. But that revelation causes humanity to split in two, resulting in war, famine, betrayal, and ultimately death in pursuit of life. The following arc, Future, then fast forwards 3,000 years to the end of humanity and is the final part of this story chronologically, which is crazy for 1967. I mean, the same thing can be said for Frank Herbert's Dune over here, but Tezuka was doing these kinds of out-of-order storytelling stuff before Tarantino or Nisio Ishin, and yet it still all makes perfect sense to this day. The idea of jumping around different times and locations to explore vague and subjective matters like the inner psychology of immortality and life was an incredibly forward-thinking way of storytelling for its time, and would later go on to inspire goated manga writers of all genres. Like seriously, this dude just did not let go when it came to the inspiration department. Look, was that whole section just an excuse for me to talk about one of my favorite manga series ever created and possibly one of the greatest manga series ever written? Of course it was, you dummy. Now go and read Phoenix, otherwise I'm gonna completely scrap that Oyasumi Punpun idea that I planned about 5 years ago. Don't make me do it, I swear to God. Before we move along any further in this messy timeline of manga, let's take an important detour to talk about a genre of manga that is, again, constantly undervalued and underappreciated amongst the general manga reading audience. The shoujo genre. Listen, I know this may be hard to believe for some of you, but I am a male. I may have a micro penis, but I'm still a male. But I love shoujo manga. If you remember earlier in the video, I mentioned Hasegawa Machiko's influence on the genre as a whole. Well, not long after the success of Sazae-san came an absolute explosion of quality manga series from the shoujo genre. But the one manga that really kick-started the shoujo manga movement alongside Sazae-san as it's known today is this little manga released in 1953 called Princess Knight, which was created by, you guessed it, Tezuka Osamu. Seriously, what could this man not do? Stop cooking, for God's sake. Now, Princess Knight here was revolutionary in the manga world for a number of reasons. It was one of the first manga series to openly portray a strong female lead with androgynous qualities, with the main character Sapphire having been born with the blue heart of a male and the pink heart of a female. Trust me, it makes sense in the context of the story, don't ask. Not only was this the first example of gender bending in manga, but it would also go on to influence many tropes we would later see in both shoujo and non-shoujo works. Like the aforementioned strong female leads in manga like Nana and the Rose of Versailles, as well as every other now very tropey quality that you see in every shoujo heroine from this point onwards. At the same time, there was massive influence taken from the world of jojoga, or lyrical paintings. A style of painting started in the early 1900s that focused on strong internal emotions being portrayed in a more physical, outside world sense, which we would see later on strewn all over the shoujo manga world with its bubbly, soft, and sensitive portrayals of emotion. Like, now that I know this fact, the way that shoujo manga is structured makes total sense to me. Like when I first saw this kind of stuff, I always wondered like where these shapes were coming from. Like, I thought it was like some like weird glare coming through the window type of thing. Like, goddamn, bro, it's sunny. Close the blinds. But having seen the success of Princess Knight, a bunch of monthly shoujo magazines were created afterwards, like Gekkan Nakayoshi and Gekkan Ribbon, just to name the more famous ones. Like, these are kind of the equivalents, if you don't know, to like Shonen Jump in the shoujo world. Like in the shonen world, the shoujo movement would also go on to expand and experiment in its multiple genre fusions until we arrive at the ultimate queen of shoujo manga, a little series by Takeuchi Naoko called Sailor Moon. Listen guys, do I even need to go into detail about why this series is important in the context of this video? Well, let me do it anyway because this video is already long enough. It revolutionized not only the magical girl genre as we know it, but also made the shoujo genre accessible to an otherwise non-shoujo fanbase, with many boys falling in love with the series due to its complex character dynamics and batshit insane storylines, which, by the way, just keep getting more and more insane the further you read into Sailor Moon. I remember years ago when I visited the Sailor Moon Museum right here with my cousin, and I was legitimately not only the only foreigner in this museum, but I was legitimately the only dude in this entire museum, and I still remember to this day the hundreds of pairs of judging eyes who were just watching me stroll through this very pink space. And in my head, I just thought like, girls, why are you looking at me that way? I'm one of you guys. Sure, was it a bit traumatic? Was it a bit awkward? Sure, but that wasn't gonna stop me from enjoying some kawaii anime girls, you feel me, dog? Tsuki no Usagi here, the main character, was also one of the first examples of the superheroine subgenre that focused on female leads having characteristics that posed as more ambitious and dutiful and introspective compared to the meek and obedient female heroines you would see in other shoujo manga at the time. If you were alive during the peak of the Sailor Moon manga and anime, then you would remember every single girl who read it or watched it wanting to grow up to be like a Sailor Scout. Someone who was strong-willed, heroic, and badass. And every male who grew up reading Sailor Moon wanted to date a girl that had all of these qualities. I mean, I sure as hell did. God, the amount of times I dreamt about being with a girl like Sailor Mercury right here. Jesus Christ, Army, just take me now. As someone personally who also read and watched a lot of Sailor Moon growing up, I can tell you firsthand that this series single-handedly made me interested in the shoujo genre from a young age, and actually proved to me that not all hard-hitting action series necessarily need to fit into the shonen genre. Manga series like Revolutionary Girl Utena, Fushigi Yuugi, Escaflowne, Cardcaptor Sakura, Banana Fish, these are just the tip of the iceberg of fantastic and enjoyable shoujo series that really all people of all genders can appreciate, and is really proving that shoujo can be somewhat of a misleading genre title. But let's pull the handbrake here for a second and think potentially, well, what if we want something a little spicier? I mean, all these heterosexual romance stories are great and all, but not everybody in the world swings that way. It's 2024. Get with the times, people. Well, someone in the shoujo manga world thought the exact same thing, and one day woke up and decided to be a martyr by creating a brand new subgenre of shoujo manga that would soon take over the entire internet. Yaoi. In the late 70s, there were two manga artists, namely Sakata Yasuko and Hatsu Akiko, who were knee-deep in the doujinshi movement at the time. Meaning manga that was independently created and released as opposed to getting big publication companies to puppet the direction and style of their works. Think of it kind of like the indie music scene that does whatever the they want to do as opposed to releasing music on a major label. The two came together, started drawing up some shoujo manga, added a couple of ghost peppers into it, and coined the term yaoi, which, fun fact if you didn't know, is actually an acronym for the phrase yamanashi, ochinashi, iminashi, which in English translates to no climax, no conclusion, no meaning, which is hilarious because yaoi manga probably has the most amount of climaxing I've ever seen, if you get my drift. The yaoi movement was originally started as a parody of sorts and a subtle f*** you to the mainstream manga world, as well as being used in the community in a sort of post-ironic, self-deprecating way to describe manga that mostly consisted of mainstream manga boys making furious love towards one another, which in turn caused every single female in Japan to simultaneously froth at the mouth and spew rainbows. From there, multiple subgenres of the yaoi movement started to be born, starting with shonen ai, or boys love, which is pretty self-explanatory. It's boys making love. So then evolving into subgenres like tanbi, or aesthetic manga, which focus more on having a well thought out narrative and structure than just two dudes boning each other for the sake of it. To then finally evolving into june works, which focus more on original stories and characters rather than just, you know, Todoroki and Deku fisting each other romantically. I haven't seen something like that, but I know it exists. One publication I found while doing research for this part of the video, by the way, about yaoi manga describes the genre as pedantic and difficult to understand, but I seriously don't know what's so difficult about all of this. Like, have they watched Serial Experiments Lane? Obviously, the yaoi movement was originally aimed towards a female audience who were looking for this sort of stuff, but over the years, its evolution has birthed some genuinely great storytelling and genre combinations that have slightly opened up the audience to whoever can or wants to stomach this kind of stuff. I don't judge works on genre, I judge works on the quality of their contents, and I have read my fair share of yaoi manga. And in case you were wondering, because I'm sure no one asked, my favorite yaoi manga of all time is Killing Stalking, this one right here. Combining elements of psychological horror and human drama, it's a genuinely thrilling story that keeps delivering devastating blow after blow with its mystery elements that is genuinely exciting to read, even if you may not care anything about the whole yaoi stuff that's involved in it. And yes, I get it, I can already see it in the comments right now. Oh, Joey, the Killing Stalking is technically not a manga, it's a Korean manga. Yeah, I get it, alright? But that doesn't take away from the fact that Killing Stalking is a great freaking series, alright? Just shut up and read it. Of course, we can't forget about the other type of spicy manga genre, women on women action action, aka the scissor synergy, aka Yuri manga. Funnily enough, actually, the origin of Yuri manga actually stems from a gay men's magazine from the 1970s called Barazoku, with its editor-in-chief at the time, Ito Bungaku, labeling the magazine's female readers as Yurizoku, or the Lily Tribe. Like, am I the only one that finds that vigorously ironic and hilarious? In case you were wondering, over history, white lilies in Japan were used to represent purity and beauty in women, which describes a lot of Yuri manga out there because, goddamn, they all look way too beautiful for this planet. In the early 90s, we started to see entire magazines dedicated to this very niche subgenre, like Ladies Comic Misto and Comic Yurihime, before exploding in popularity in the late 90s and early 2000s with works like the aforementioned Sailor Moon, which definitely weren't afraid to show two characters being very, very lovey-dovey towards one another. In most instances, I would say, Jesus, girls, get a room, but in this instance, no. Please, let me take a close look. Enhance, goddammit! Of course, this also ended up becoming quite controversial at the time, with the international version of Sailor Moon changing the relationship of Sailor Neptune and Sailor Uranus here from simple lesbian lovers to, cousins? You know, cousins that sometimes aren't afraid to bone one another. Like, what the like, did Lynyrd Skynyrd make these changes? Some of my personal Yuri recommendations are namely Bloom Into You, Citrus, and My Lesbian Experience with Loneliness, especially this last one. Even though it has a somewhat weird title and aesthetic, please give this one a read because it is actually an amazing piece of storytelling. Now, at this point in the video, we've established the beginnings of a lot of genres that we see in manga today, but as you are all well aware, manga really does push the boundaries when it comes to genres that can be explored. So let's take a closer look at some of the more notable genre-defining artists that are in the manga world, a lot of which will involve this man right here, Nagai Go. Listen, I hate to break it to you, but I don't think you can call yourself a manga fan without knowing who this esteemed gentleman is, because man, did this guy run so other mangakas could walk. I think if Tezuka is considered the father of manga to everyone, then Nagai should be credited as like the cool uncle of manga because of the sheer amount of innovation he brought to manga today. This video is long enough, so let's go through them one by one, shall we? The super robot or mecha genre, commonly associated with franchises like Gundam, actually got its modern interpretation from Nagai's series Mazinger Z. Up until this point, mecha manga would have the controller or the pilot of the robot be placed independently to where the robot actually is, usually in the form of some kind of like joystick-based controller like what you would see in Tetsujin 28 But Nagai instead said, hey, here's an idea. What if the controller of the robot is inside the robot? It's funny how this concept actually came about, actually. Apparently, Nagai was stuck in really heavy traffic one day on the way to work and thought to himself, man, I wish my car would just like, I don't know, turn into a robot or something so that I could just like walk across all the traffic or something. Actually, that's a really good idea. The aforementioned magical girl genre was pushed further by Nagai's series Cutie Honey, which, according to Nagai himself, is the first example of a female lead in a shonen manga. Now, there isn't much like source on that, and it may just be a thing of like Nagai just making it the fuck up, but hey, this man has too much of a legacy. I don't doubt him for a second about that. The post-apocalyptic genre was pioneered with his series Violence Jack, which ended up getting an anime adaptations during the OVA boom of the 80s, and Jesus Christ, it's so incredibly violent. Like, I know violence is in the title of this series, but it's almost comical how violent Violence Jack actually is. Like, it makes the first episode of Elfen Lied look like goddamn Sesame Street. And if Nagai's track record wasn't already impressive enough for you guys, he was also the first person ever to pioneer the ecchi genre with his series Harenchi Gakuen, which would go on to breed an entire generation of men and women frothing at two-dimensional boobies and panties in their Discord servers. And if you are one of those people, leave a like on this video. Oh, and of course, let's not forget his most commercially successful manga ever created, Devilman, which would go on to inspire an insane roster of future mangakas and anime creators like, oh, I don't know, only one of the most incredibly influential and popular anime series ever created, Neon Genesis Evangelion. Don't know if you've ever heard of it, but it's pretty good. Nagai's contribution to manga truly cannot be understated. Mind you, he made all of these series in the span of like 15 years, and throughout his entire lifetime contributed to over 360 individual manga series. Now that is dedication at the top level. But let's talk about dedication in a different sense, namely dedication to just one long-running series. So I throw the question over to you guys. What is the longest running manga series ever? Naturally, you might think of titles like One Piece or JoJo's Bizarre Adventure or Baki, and as impressive as these volume counts are, they pale in comparison to the king of this title, Golgo 13. Originally created by Saito Takao, the series started in 1968 and believe it or not is still ongoing to this day. At the time of me recording this video, Golgo 13 has 211 volumes. Now, if you've never heard of Golgo 13, then I don't blame you, because this series is mostly known only in Japan, and I feel that, weirdly enough, this is a pattern that we see with a lot of very, very long-running manga series, you know, series like Dokaben and Kochikame being great examples of that. But you're probably wondering, Joey, what the hell kind of story warrants 200 plus volumes? Well, simply put, the story of Golgo 13 follows our titular main character here, who is a professional assassin, and each chapter or story arc follows Golgo carrying out assassination missions sent to him by basically whoever can afford his services. The way the manga has managed to last this long is that newer story arcs follow more current time events with the inclusion of time-sensitive, real-life individuals like, for example, former US President Donald Trump being portrayed as this corrupt businessman called Ronald Crump. That is genius. Also, in a classic act of fictional storytelling, the age of the main character here remains pretty much unchanged, which works great for the author because he had originally set up Golgo to have a unidentified age and background as his whole character profile, so it's almost like he planned for this story to be extremely long. Also, here's a fun fact about Golgo you never asked for. The name Golgo 13 is actually a reference to the death of Jesus Christ, with Golgo being short for Golgotha, the place where Jesus was crucified, and 13 being traditionally viewed as the unlucky number. I think these independently constructed episodic series that focus more on a little shorter singular storylines over and over again, one after the other, rather than one big overarching story like you'd see in a lot of long-running shonen series, is the key ingredient to having these extremely long serializations, because God knows how the hell Golgo can still do what he does after 56 years. Like my man should be carrying a cane and a respirator, not a fucking high caliber rifle. Come here, sonny, let me teach you how to fire off this M16. I learned how to do this in World War I. Here we go. Like, Gramps, chill out. You're really scaring me. But speaking of scary, let's talk about another manga genre that I personally have a great love and appreciation for: horror. I think a lot of people, manga fans included, kind of undervalue a lot of horror manga because, oh, it's not even that scary, man. Like, what are you, some kind of pussy? The answer is yes. Did you not hear about my micro penis earlier? Most people think of Ito Junji as the father of horror manga, and although that assessment isn't exactly false, we gotta give proper credit where credit is due. So let's talk about the actual beginnings of horror manga with Umezu Kazuo. If Junji Ito is considered the father of horror manga, then Umezu Kazuo, I'd say, was like the god of horror manga, or I guess maybe the Satan of horror manga works thematically, but that doesn't quite roll off the tongue. You get what I mean. Funnily enough, Umezu actually got his start by writing shoujo manga series, but with a very obvious horror twist. His 1965 manga Hebi Onna, or Reptilia, is often credited as being one of the first successful horror manga that would also later go on to shape horror manga into the modern era by influencing people such as Junji Ito. One aspect that made Reptilia really stand out was Umezu's combination of traditional shoujo manga aesthetics with some gruesome and macabre imagery that heavily utilized the style of old ukiyo-e paintings from the 1600s. In fact, some of these works were so gruesome and so terrifying at the time that apparently Umezu would get complaints from parents of young children who were just trying to read their favorite shoujo manga, but instead had to be subject to some of the most terrifying imagery that kids could have seen in the 60s. Mommy, what is that thing coming out of that girl's stomach? Did she eat too much spicy meatballs? But it wasn't all just for pure shock value. In fact, one of his most famous works, The Drifting Classroom, would go on to be a massive inspiration for future horror manga, and would even grab himself the 1974 Shogakukan Manga Award, which is an absolute upset. I mean, to understand how much of an upset this series winning the Shogakukan Manga Award is, it's kind of like the equivalent of Cannibal Corpse winning a Grammy, which I'm sad that hasn't happened yet. Also, I found out while doing research for this video that apparently one of Umezu's assistants back in the day was none other than Rumiko Takahashi, the creator of Ranma Half, Urusei Yatsura, and Inuyasha. Let that sink in. I guess if you think about it, it kind of makes sense, since Takahashi is also considered a shoujo manga artist that isn't afraid of throwing in slightly macabre and traditional Japanese horror elements into her works, like what you would see in some scenes of Inuyasha or Mermaid Saga. But just knowing that this somehow influenced this is really cool and weird at the same time. From here, it's kind of difficult to pinpoint exactly what came next in the chronology of the history of manga, as this era really did help boom the popularity of manga as a concept and as pretty much a household name for all genders and all demographics. You had the birth and growth of different sports manga with series like Ashita no Jo, Captain Tsubasa, and Slam Dunk, whose successes not only became phenomena in the manga world, but also would go on to be cultural phenomena for their individual sports. Like Slam Dunk here, for example, greatest sports manga ever created, it's not even an argument, shut up kids, was so insanely popular that it single-handedly brought the sports of basketball to Japan. And according to a bunch of studies, apparently there was an incredible spike of kids in middle school and high school who joined their basketball teams as a direct result of the power of this manga. And I know that to be a fact because I was also one of those loser kids who started playing basketball because of Slam Dunk. In fact, the late 80s and the early 90s is considered by many to be the second golden age of manga, thanks predominantly to its incredibly strong lineup of different shonen manga that were just making wave after wave after wave. I'm talking Dragon Ball, Yu Yu Hakusho, Fist of the North Star, Rurouni Kenshin, Yu-Gi-Oh!, City Hunter, Saint Seiya, Eyes, Shaman King, Hikaru no Go, Prince of Tennis, JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, oh my god, and that's just Shonen Jump. In the late 90s and early 2000s then came the third golden age of manga, with some of the most well-known and internationally recognized manga series emerging from this era. We obviously have the big three, One Piece, Naruto, and Bleach, but on top of that you had some other incredibly prolific and well-established manga series that came after it as well. Look at Detective Conan, Full Metal Alchemist, Death Note, Berserk, D-Gray Man, Hunter x Hunter, Attack on Titan, One Punch Man, Fairy Tail, honestly, the list goes on and on. And looking back on all of this retrospectively, I think there are mainly two reasons as to why the third golden age of manga actually happened. Not to say that these works weren't just as good or even better than its predecessors, but was certainly helped by these two reasons to become as popular as they did become. Reason number one being the power of the internet, which pushed the discoverability and conversation of this niche medium called manga to the Western world, with blog pages and news articles and YouTube channels with questionable quality, helping to further push the discussion of manga forward to all demographics. The second reason being a little more on the subtler side, but just as important. Manga publishers in Japan suddenly had this epiphany where they went, oh, wait, you don't have to be Japanese to enjoy manga. The birth of many international anime conventions and a huge spike of interest to just visit Japan for otaku-related reasons really told the manga industry that there is actually a huge demand for this stuff outside of Japan. And so publishers started making deals with official translation teams and international publishers to push their works into other languages and regions all across the world. And as the years progress, there are still plenty of new mangakas emerging out of the woodworks that are here to push manga forward in some of the most creative and innovative ways. Fujimoto Tatsuki, Taizan 5, and Miyazaki Natsujuke are just a handful of my personal favorite new manga artists that are really pushing the boundaries of what is considered manga and giving something really unique to the world that has already birthed thousands and thousands of ideas that have somehow managed to make their way out of the crevice of the darkness and into the limelight of readers' eyes. And every time I visit my local bookstore, I'm still constantly finding new refreshing ideas for manga, which I'm sitting back and inevitably waiting for them to be turned into anime series, because that's apparently what happens in this day and age. Look, there are so many different manga series I can delve into in this video, but the whole point of the video is this. Manga is truly beautiful. I think after knowing its history of how it came to be and being aware of the giants whose shoulders modern manga stands on really helps you to appreciate the medium for what it is. Because day in and day out, manga is still being innovated and expanded upon thanks to outside inspirations, new trends, and the overall growth of adjacent Japanese media like anime and games and light novels and of course hentai. And as much as I personally have a fondness for the oldie but goldies I grew up on, I am truly and honestly excited to see where manga is going to go from here. I think you really need to have a special mind and skill in order to create these vivid, imaginative, and wonderful worlds and concepts that readers all over the world can just get sucked into, all while just using a couple of pens and a sheet of paper. And I truly believe that the people who are able to do that week in and week out, every single month, every single day without rest, need to be appreciated and respected, whether you personally enjoy their works or not. Because the sad truth is 99% of mangakas out there don't see the massive monetary success. They don't see the worldwide praise and glory. They don't see the distribution of countless bootleg merch of their works being sold on Alibaba and Wish, but still decide to go through that grueling and arduous task of making the stories that are trapped into their mind into a readable reality, purely for the love and appreciation for the art. As cheesy as it is to say, I really can't imagine a world without manga. Because ever since that fateful day I picked up that volume of Doraemon while sitting on my pee-stained car rug, my life has truly changed for the better. Through experiencing these stories and characters and worlds, it's really made me appreciate so many things in life that I still carry with me to this day. So thank you, mangakas, for your hard work and dedication to the craft. Thank you, manga, for giving us, and millions all across the world, a place that we can just get lost in and enjoy to our heart's content. And thank you for watching this video. Okay, well, this video took me a really freaking long time to research and make, so hope you guys enjoyed it. Go ahead, put in the comments. I know you probably already have at this point of, wow, oh my god, an actual anime manga video by Joey the Anime Man? Ain't no way. Yeah, hilarious joke, guys. Go ahead, throw it in the comments. I don't give a fuck. But I wanted to come back to like talking about anime and manga in a little bit more of a different format to how I normally do it. So if you did enjoy this video, please be sure to leave a like and leave a comment below on what I should do next. Also, I've left the titles to all of the manga series that I mentioned down in the description below in case you missed any of them or you want to check them out for yourself. I've made it a little bit easier for you to look it up in your own time. And yeah, now that I'm finally done with this video, I'm gonna go read Phoenix now for the 30th time because it's amazing and you guys should definitely go and read it. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Hey, check out some of these videos here that I have as well. You can go do that as well. I appreciate that. Subscribe if you're new, and I'll see you guys in the next video. じゃあね。